All right, we're lucky to have a very distinguished panel, present company except for me, to discuss the future building in California. On my immediate left, we have Joel Singer, somebody I've known for too long, when the dinosaurs roamed the La Brea tar pits. Who's the CEO of the California Association of Realtors, and so that needs no introduction. Most people know what those guys do. To his left, we have Ken Crandall, and Ken Crandall is the CFO of MBK Real Estate Companies. To his left, we have Paula Bibby, who is a senior lecturer here at the Anderson School, as well as an owner-operator of, what, 2,000 units?
Give or take.
2,000, depending on the given day and what the transaction flow is.
Right.
On a given day, mostly in West Los Angeles?
Mostly West LA and South Bay.
South Bay, and we have Kevin Ratner, the president of Forest City Residential West, not to be confused with Forest City Residential all over the country. It's a big national.
Right.
It's a big national company. So
I'm part of that big company.
you're part of that big company.
Yeah.
So why don't you describe your company, what you do? We'll do that, and we'll start with you, Kevin.
We are a national builder and owner of real estate. We operate in 27 states, primarily in 7 core markets: New York, Philadelphia, DC, Dallas, Denver, Los Angeles, and San Francisco. We're headquartered in Cleveland, Ohio, and I run the West Coast. We build apartment buildings, shopping centers, and office buildings. We also have some land business and other sort of adjunct businesses that we do, but that's our primary focus.
In the interest of full disclosure, when I worked on Wall Street, Forest City was a client of the firm. Okay, Paul?
Thank you, David. So we're primarily based here in Los Angeles. We have apartment buildings throughout the string of cities from Santa Monica basically into Hollywood and Los Feliz. Probably about 2/3 of the portfolio is located in that string of cities, cutting through campus, of course. And then about 1/3 of the units are in the South Bay beach cities. Probably 40% of the portfolio is under rent stabilization, and the rest of it's market rate. And then during the housing downturn, we started investing in single family in Kansas City, Missouri. So we accumulated approximately 350 housing units out of foreclosure. We currently rent all of those.
How's that going? How's that working?
It's going great. I think over 300 houses, we have fewer than 10 vacancies currently. We have no debt on the properties. We did it as friends and family rounds. We did 6 small investment funds, kind of increasing in size as we were able to remove risk from the platform. And we're doing about 12% unlevered yield since inception on all 6 funds. And we stopped buying at the end of 2013 once house prices started to creep up.
Are you on the Kansas side of the border or the
We're
Missouri side?
primarily on the Missouri side of the border, as it's more landlord friendly, as I've learned.
Okay. Kent?
So MBK Real Estate, we are a wholly owned subsidiary of the Mitsui Company, a large Japanese conglomerate, represent their real estate platform in North America, and really primarily do business in 3 different lines. Obviously, we're a residential developer through our home building operations, a large developer in the multifamily space, and on the other end of the spectrum, we're a large developer operator of senior housing, typically in the independent, assisted living, all the way up to the memory care level as well.
Okay, George, could I have my slide?
And most of our operations are Western U.S. based right now.
Okay. I need to show a slide. All right. My title is Something is Broken in California. And what we have here is from 1971 to 1973. We had 3 years, this is 40 years ago, 250,000 units unauthorized by permit in the state of California. 1976 to 79, 237,000 authorized by permits. 1984 to 1989, which is a 6-year stretch, 250,000 housing units authorized by permits. 2004-05, the last boom, we have 211. So these are basically picking years where we had clusters of 200,000 or more. 2014, 85,000. 2015 is a typo. That should be 105, not 115. That's what Jerry's estimating for California. All right, so my question to the panel, is there a chance we could get back to get 200? Can we see a year with 180,000 starts? Because remember, a lot more people California than there were then. And if California were 13% of the US in population, and we're going to do roughly 1.1 million, forgetting about my forecast of 1.4 million next year, 1.1 million US is sort of baked in the cake. That would imply something like 140,000 units, and we're going to be doing 105. So can we get back, forget 200, can we get back to 180? You want to start, Joe?
Sure. From our standpoint, we used to talk about housing needs being about 230,000. We've dialed that number down looking at the demographic trends, and the forecast was fairly optimistic, but showed a much lower growth to now an expectation where you need about 100. There's depletions, there's internal demographic growth, and obviously there's in-migration. But when you juice it down to the most conservative way, you're looking at a need for 165,000 units. And you can even argue that there's about a shortfall of 600,000 to 800,000 units because of doubling up and everything that occurred post 2008 and 2011 period. So our expectation is that you can get to 165. Maybe you can get to 180. But the fact of the matter is we're still, even at that level, if we don't get there very quick, we're still adding to the affordability deficit. And from our standpoint, there's real consequences to this. One graphic way of looking at it is in terms of economic growth that's lost because of the loss of mobility. One of the things Dave and I were talking about, going back to our youth, at one point we used to calculate that the average single-family home in California exchanged every 7 to 8 years. Builders used to say, or lenders used to say, 7 years is the expectancy on an initial mortgage, even with flat to reduced interest rates because of turnover. That number, if you just take the pure number of single-family homes in California and divide it by the number of transactions over the last 12 to 18 months, is now approaching 20 years. In other words, the mobility is 20 years. And in a recent buyer survey we did, we surveyed buyers, and we've done this with sellers too, and every year the expectation of this home being my retirement home goes up. And even in the 30 to 39 age group, almost 50% of the buyers are saying, I expect to retire in this home. And the implications for not only the affordability issues, the squeeze on prices, but the implications for the economy, we think are very, very real, and we're very concerned about it.
Okay. Kent?
Near term, no. Long term, yeah. I think in the near term, the headwinds for us continue to be affordability, but also I think the headwinds continue to be just available land for development. I think when you look at entitlement processes and whatnot, there seems to be a real glut of land that can be developed. I think longer term, that gets solved as we start to work through the entitlement process on stuff and things along those lines. So I think near term, no. Long term, yeah.
Okay.
I will give a resounding no. I think it pretty much starts and ends with entitlements. Obviously in California, we have CEQA, which is a big barrier to development, and what we really need is more incentives. Now, Kevin and I have actually been on an affordable housing task force for the last year and a half. We've only met a couple of times, but
Just let me stop you there. Back in my misspent youth when I knew this guy, I was on an affordable housing task force to say this never ends, appointed by Jerry Brown in his first iteration. Statewide task force in 1977. So
well, luckily we're both young and we'll maybe see this through to fruition. But what's interesting is we have a few council actions getting set forth in the next few months. We've kind of tried to come up with a short list of mission critical items, things like micro unit ordinances, things like using city-owned parking lots to help put those out for RFP on development, and a host of others. And it's going to get worse before it gets better. Currently in LA County, if you look at 80% area median income or less, we have 500,000 fewer units than we need. Now, this is California numbers that you're looking at in front of you, so just extrapolate that. The problem gets exponentially worse. So I think that we certainly have a lot of heads pointed in the right direction, but like anything else requiring political action, it's going to be several years out before we get any sort of meaningful reform in this, if at all.
Kevin?
That's all single-family homes, right?
No, it's multi and single.
Includes everything?
Everything.
Yeah.
Doesn't include mobile homes. It's authorized by permit.
That's clearly the future.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't see that getting much higher. I think it's too bad. I think we have a major housing crisis. But Yeah, every time there's a new mayor who comes into office in Los Angeles, we get appointed a new housing task force. Everyone comes in guns blazing, we're going to solve it this time, and then usually about halfway through their first term, they're like, yeah, we're going to keep the housing task force, but we don't actually think anything's going to get done there. So I just think that it's such a daunting issue, and it's so complex, it touches so many of the fundamental parts of the community that, I think housing starts is a huge, huge problem.
Okay, I want to get back to entitlements in a little bit, but first I want to talk about Marcus, so I'll ask you, you're doing mostly in Los Angeles, you do San Francisco, Los Angeles. Where have rents been and where are they going for your product?
Rents are high and they're going higher.
Okay.
Not as fast,
Could you
but they're
give us some
going higher.
examples, like how much, like what's the rent per square foot and what you're getting in downtown LA, and
Sure.
how much have they changed in the past couple of years?
Sure. So rents have gone up dramatically in downtown Los Angeles, which is where we own most of our product. We've owned product in downtown since the early 70s. So we've seen Los Angeles change a lot and downtown change a lot. I would say that in the last 2-3 years, the rents have gone up exponentially faster than I think we've ever seen them go up before.
What does exponentially mean? Is that 8%, 12%, 7%?
I'll give you more real numbers. So rents are typically, for the last, while, they've hovered around $2.5 a foot. Now high rises are pushing over $4 a foot. Mid rises, which is 5 stories of wood over 2 of concrete, are probably getting, in the $350 range. So, they're going up from there. It is very location specific. So we have one project which is in South Park area. We're targeting, $325, $350 for those rents, and then we're over in Chinatown, which is just on the other side of the Civic Center, and there we're at like $275. So rents are very different as you move from different parts of downtown. But in the main part of downtown, the place sort of the Arts District, Old Bank District, over by Staples Center, rents are pushing over $4.
So you're talking about for a 2-bedroom apartment, $4,000, $3,500, $4,000.
Somewhere around there,
Some
yeah.
plus
But
or
the units are getting smaller too, so.
It's
used
less
to-
than 1,000, so it's 900.
Definitely less
It's a
than 1,000.
900-foot
Yeah,
2-bedroom.
Yep. San Francisco, they're pushing $6.
Okay. I want to go back to what's going on in San Francisco in a minute. Okay, Paul? You're in West Side. You're quoting double-digit numbers?
Yeah,
for the past few years?
it wouldn't be erroneous to say that in the last 4 years, we've probably had rent growth go up by about 50% on West Side properties. Keep in mind, if you take the rent-controlled stock out, then you have a fewer number of units that are trading at market.
Right.
So it exacerbates that effect in an upward direction. I'll also say that you take LA, you have 88 different cities that make up LA County. What's interesting is that the frothy cities that have always been high rent areas are continuing to do so. But you also have a lot of surprises, places like Highland Park, places like Eagle Rock, Silver Lake, Echo Park. All these municipalities now have rents on par with places like West Hollywood and Hollywood. And you're seeing a huge renaissance effect in some of these, what I call frontier markets, which are not that way anymore. Anecdotally, we bought a building, and frankly, every deal that I've passed on 6 months down the road, I regret passing on it because whatever rents I possibly could have fathomed broke those projections. We did a deal, 24-unit building in Hollywood near Griffith Park. I underwrote the units. They're 500 square feet at $1,650 because my little brother told me that he was going to get that, and I believed him. I thought, he was crazy. We're getting $2,095 for those units, and I go to the lender, and they actually have restrictions on how much they'll refinance the building for, given such a fast increase in those rental numbers. So it's outstanding. It's frothy. It's frightening, frankly, but that's the world that we're in currently.
Okay, or Kent, you're more in the for sale housing side?
Yeah,
what do you
also in
say?
the multifamily
Okay,
as
so what
well.
are you saying,
And
where's your multifamily, and then talk about for sale?
Really, multifamily is sort of sprinkled out through Southern California, San Diego, borderline Riverside, Orange County area, a few other areas. It's same. We're seeing, rent growth. I would put it probably in the 3.5%, 4%, even more in those areas. I think we're a little bit different.
Like
We're a little bit different because we're in more suburban areas. You guys are certainly in more urban areas than what we are. And so, you're going to see price differentials based on that. And our senior housing side of the equation, which, I think a lot of people lose a little bit sight of as well. We've seen rent growth in the senior housing side of the equation pushing close to 6%
On the senior housing
in
side?
senior housing, yeah.
And were you seeing pricing on your for-sale housing? And where are you there, where are you developing?
So for sale, really same thing, sprinkled up throughout California. We've got a single project up in the Sacramento area, and then we've got housing all throughout Southern California. And really, that is very project-specific. And so, growth in what I would consider to be more infill locations, we've seen prices push 7, 8, 9, 10% in those areas. In the more Riverside County areas, I think you're seeing marginally less, but still there. But I think the rate is starting to flatten. If you look at what we've done this year compared to what we did last year, in terms of price appreciation, I think you're seeing a more leveled rate than what we saw a year ago.
Are you seeing first-time buyers moving out from apartments? What are you saying?
Yeah. We typically play in the first-time move up, so that's the customer base we really target. And so, you are starting to see the first-time home buyer come out. But that's a big deal. The housing stock is a food chain, and it's got to start at that first-time home buyer side of the equation. And so I think, when we talk about permits and things along those lines, I think, as we see that first-time home buyer sort of work through the student loan issues and some of those other things, you're going to see a robust first-time housing market, but that's probably pushed out 5 or 6 years.
Kevin and Paul, are you seeing move-outs to buy, for people to buy or not?
I'm not quite sure about that.
Okay,
There's a
Yeah.
lot of turnover, I will tell you that. The
Okay.
turnover is as high as 50%.
okay.
Yeah, we're pretty close to that in turnover. I don't know why they're leaving
You don't know why,
necessarily.
you don't survey, you don't,
We do survey
But
them.
you don't
They
have-
move for so many different reasons. They move because they got relocated, they move because they got a new job, they move because there's a new apartment building down the street that's giving a concession.
okay.
They move because they're going to buy a home. But
Joel, you seeing, do you have any data on that?
We do. First-time buyer numbers were down as low as 33%, which is, in this kind of a marketplace with the affordability, although getting worse, being much better than average, that's a very low figure. They've gone up a little bit. In our survey that we did in spring this year, it looked like we would hit about 36, 37% first-time buyers in the resale market. Interestingly enough, we have
What's normal first-time buyers with like,
over in the long run,
previous cycles?
well, going back, if you go back 30 years, we're looking at about 42 to 44%. But historically, for the last 2 cycles, it's generally been in the low 40s and then gone down to 30%, and that's usually your sign that, the bear market sign comes out, like on the chart. But what's interesting, we are seeing the first-time buyer market actually hold up reasonably well. Part of that is a change in lending standards. The other thing we noticed is the highest level ever of first-time buyers, and buyers generally, who bought a home coming not from a rental, but coming from their parents' house.
Okay.
So we
That's
started
how
to
they
see.
save money.
Yeah, that's how they save money. It's 12% of our buyer sample reported having lived at home in the last 12 months. And so you're starting to see that. We see that as a good sign. But the affordability problem is going to determine where we end up. And we're certainly seeing prices which have increased at double-digit levels. If you go back 18 months, we had a period of extraordinary increase. The 30% number over the last 3 years is pretty close to what we track statewide, but that number's coming down pretty rapidly. Even in places like Silicon Valley and San Francisco, we're seeing softening.
Okay. Kevin, could you tell us briefly a little war story that we talked about on the phone in San Francisco about your project?
Oh, in San Francisco, we have a project under entitlement up there, and we were in front of Planning Commission last week, 2 weeks ago, and it was a very contentious meeting. It was 10 hours, a 10-hour-long meeting. There were 6 hours of public comment, and at the end, there was a vote because the opposition wanted a continuance, and the Planning Commission voted down the continuance, at which point a Occupy Wall Street type protest broke out and went on for an hour. They had to forcibly remove the protesters from the chambers and then eventually let everybody back in, and we were successful and got past Planning Commission on a 5-2 vote. But San Francisco is a very contentious
Tell
place
what you're
right
trying to build. Tell the audience what you're trying to build.
now. So we're trying to build
Where was it? And also,
Yeah, it's about 1.5 million square feet. It's about 700,000 feet of office. It's about 400,000 feet of condos and about 250,000 feet of apartments.
and do you have an
We're providing-
affordable housing component in
We're
there?
providing 33% affordable housing, some of it off-site, some of it on-site, over $73 million in fees and public benefits that are going into the local community some of it back to the city. And the displacement issue is very real up in San Francisco, and people are very upset about it, needless to say. Even if you're doing what we think is a good job providing public benefits to the community and providing affordable housing.
Does that have to go to the Board of Supervisors after the
Yep.
Planning Commission?
Yep.
So you got
Yep.
to relive it, you got to
Yep.
relive the whole process?
Oh, yeah. Trying to get there in December. We'll see what happens.
Okay. Let me ask a question we also talked about on the phone. In New York City, there's a progressive mayor, Bill de Blasio, and he's made a policy choice and said income equality and affordable housing is the most important thing over the neighborhood, over the environment, over historic preservation. And he's upzoned, in the process of upzoning huge swaths of New York City, and basically is that if the developer buys anywhere between 20 and 30% affordable housing, they get development as a matter of right, no hearing, no nothing, and basically says, all right, you go forward. The result of the policy is that this year in New York City, there's going to be 50,000 units under permit. Now, if you multiply that out, because New York City is 8 million people, 40 million, multiply that, it's equivalent to 250,000 units in California. Now, is there any chance of that kind of policy happening in a major city in California?
No.
Depends what you call a major city. Fresno will do it.
Okay.
Well, we're run by 15 council districts, so we don't really have a mayorally run city. And I would also say that, kind of along those lines, probably a third of those units are in Brooklyn, by the way,
Yeah.
which has had a ton of robust activity. I think when it comes down to it, we have to use the monetary and non-monetary tools that are available to us, and we're not getting the kind of shot in the arm we need through density bonuses. For example, Senate Bill 1818, which is California state law that supersedes all local laws, allows developers a density bonus. But if you look at all the units that were built in Los Angeles that are 120% of AMI or below, since 2008, we've only seen 1,500 new units built enacting that ordinance.
But the density doesn't affect the square footage, so you don't really get anything.
Well,
It's units.
you're not getting the units, which is what you desperately need the most.
Right, because the density bonus applies to units, it doesn't apply to square footage.
Correct.
So you need an FAR bonus, not.
We need FAR, but we need this on steroids is what we need, and we need it now. And we also need other things like plug-and-play zoning is a great idea. It's called the master EIR. Rather than each developer going out and having to get their environmental impact review, which is going to cost them 7 figures, 6 months, and an ulcer, you can actually have the city codify a planning district that allows developers to come in by right and plug and play their development proposals in such a way that's meaningful and follows city planning action.
Can they do that? Is that happening anywhere?
I've proposed it for 3 years now. I don't see it happening in LA anywhere, but
Do you see that happening in Orange County or
No,
Riverside? No.
In the state legislature?
No.
Bill by right is certainly an issue we raise continually along with our colleagues at the Building Industry Association, and it really has no legs, unfortunately.
Okay, you seeing any kind of enhanced infrastructure financing districts doing anything? That help?
We're using an IFD up in San Francisco to do a project on the water called Pier 70.
Why don't you explain that a little bit to the audience?
Sure. So if you're familiar with San Francisco, we're just south of Mission Bay, right by an area of town called Dogpatch. And it's an area owned by the Port of San Francisco. They've owned the property for a very long time. They went out with an RFP. They selected us. We're developing, the total project is about, I think, 60 acres. We're doing about 28 acres. It's about 3.5 million feet, give or take. 1 or 2 million feet of office, 1 or 2 million feet of residential, sort of depends on where the market's going. It's a 20-year project. We've just started our EIR process. Since there is no redevelopment, since there is no way of doing sort of tax increment financing, this new, actually it's been around for a while, IFDs have been around for a while, but the port has decided that they want to do an IFD, which is effectively tax increment financing.
Right.
As the property taxes go up, they're able to capture actually 90% of that and put it back into the project to finance the project.
So that could happen. That's a substitute for the CRAs, basically.
Basically, yes.
But it's small. It's nowhere near where the CRAs.
Well, right, yes, it's small.
Well, the
Okay.
governor did sign 2 bills. We were actually quite surprised that he signed 2 bills that look like the rebirth in a small way of tax increment financing. We're hopeful that that'll be successful And that does give us some hope, because the loss of CRAs was a major loss to the affordable housing.
Okay. Now, let me ask a question to Joel and Kent. Is FHA the new subprime? And by that I mean is FHA requires now 3% down payments, and the FICO scores is going as low as 520. So that's not quite fogging a mirror, but getting pretty close to what was going on in 2004 and 2005. Is that sort of a new subprime that's building, and how much of the new starter housing is being funded by FHA right now?
I'll let you take this one
Okay.
first.
The FHA financing has shrunk considerably at one point. Historically, it's been almost hard to measure in California. It's been between 5 and 7% of the marketplace, went all the way up to 20% of the marketplace
Right.
coming out of the Great Depression, or Great Recession rather. From our standpoint, if in fact that's really what was happening at the street level, I think we'd start to get concerned. But you have a whole series of overlays occurring.
Okay.
And with the overlays, if anything, the FHA practice is tighter than it's generally been. But I think there's times in certain developments where you have to be concerned about it. And again, on the one hand, you don't want financing to stop in a large condominium development because FHA isn't there. On the other hand, they become so heavily dependent in certain neighborhoods, certain areas, that you can start to get worried.
Okay. Can the housing market for the sale market take a 5% mortgage rate?
I mean, obviously, I think yes, it will. I think it'll do a couple of things. I mean, obviously, it'll have a big impact on pricing. I was talking with a colleague during the break about, the incremental, the relationship between mortgage increases relative to home prices, and I think the statistic is about 100 basis points is about 3-4% on a home price. So, at 5%, can we still transact? Yeah, but are we going to transact at lower levels? Probably.
So you think I'm wrong that you're not going to get a rush in, and so we get
I
a 5%
think you need a short-term
boom?
rush, but long-term.
You make a short-term rush, so
Yeah.
we may be too high as we get into
Yeah, I think-
2016
I think
on our
you
forecast.
could probably graphically get something very similar to, what happened with, the tax credits coming out of the recession, so to speak, with first-time home buyer tax credits and things along those lines. You get a
That was
bump.
huge, but that is a
think you
huge
get a bump
surge and a
and then
huge
you come
hit.
back
That was a
right
huge,
down.
huge
Yeah.
surge and a huge hit. Joel?
My sense is it does give you a bounce. Initially, there's a lot of people without question on the fence. We can see that in our survey data, or the interviews we do at open houses and so on. But in the long run, I do think it further brings down price appreciation in most marketplaces. And that's not a bad thing. That's not a bad thing. So I think you can tolerate 5%, assuming that you guys are right on the forecast.
If we're right on the jobs.
On the
If
jobs,
we're right on the jobs, we're okay.
Right.
But we said that was our proviso. If we're right on the jobs, everything is going to flow. If we're wrong on the jobs, nothing's going to flow. Why don't we take some questions? Anybody, there are microphones. Anybody want to take questions on anything from the housing panel with these people here? Go to the microphone.
Hi, Charlotte Chamberlain. I understand your frustration with the permitting process in LA versus New York. But the big difference, obviously, is the availability of public transportation. New York City is developing the Hudson Yards. They've just put in a new West Side subway station. So the city can absorb that. In LA, you put in that kind of permitting on new multifamily, and the traffic just comes to more of a gridlock than it is now. I was wondering if you could comment on that. Thank you.
I have a comment, but any of the panel want to talk?
I'm happy to take it. I mean, I think it's fair to say that we're early in our transit infrastructure build-out in Los Angeles. Obviously, we've done it as an afterthought because our city was built much later relative to the life cycle of other cities. Having said that, a lot of the studies that I've done have been to promote transit-adjacent density improvements. In fact, the master EIRs that I spoke of earlier were primarily targeted at transit-adjacent sites to help enable that. But I think, having said all this, we're not going to get it right immediately. It's a process that's going to take some time. But as long as LA is gaining residents, which it is, it's incumbent upon all of us to figure out a way to make LA work holistically, using transit, using jobs and housing linkages in a more responsible manner. So does that mean some of the housing units are going to get located inland? Most likely, because that's the only place that a developer can afford to buy the land to support the rental income from that new project. But your point is well taken.
Kevin, isn't that the inherent advantage of downtown Los Angeles, where you have the transit?
Transit, yeah, I think transit helps. I think jobs, housing balance helps,
Right.
people work in downtown. Although 50% roughly of the people who live in downtown don't work in downtown. The thing about New York, and we do a lot of building in New York, is that, New York, the transit system in New York is really pretty much a failure. Like everywhere you go, it's crowded. If you try to drive from Midtown to downtown in rush hour, I mean, it's a nightmare. The difference is that it's New York. I mean, it's like no other place in the world. Everybody wants to live there, and you deal with it, and you walk, and you deal with it because it's New York. No place else quite has that attractiveness, and it's a hugely dense city. So, if we could find a way to do the density that New York is doing out here, someone did a study a long time ago, actually I think it was Frank Gehry, did a story that said, if you built high-rises all up and down Wilshire from downtown all the way to the beach, that you would house everyone you needed to house. But, this is not going to happen out here. Transit is an interesting conversation. I once went to Vancouver, talked to the planning director up there, and that person said, congestion is my friend. And they decided instead of building a new auto, freeway into town, they were going to build some transit, but mostly they were going to let people sit in traffic and realize that if they lived in downtown where they worked, they wouldn't have to drive. And then they built a lot in downtown, and now Vancouver is an amazing city. So, it's an interesting dilemma. I think Paul is right for a lot of what he's saying.
But the thing, the quote that the late Yogi Berra is nobody goes there anymore because it's too crowded. Next question. Anybody? No? Okay, thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.